It is widely assumed in the Western political narrative that state legitimacy comes from universal suffrage and multi-party competitive elections. Yet this assumption may raise two issues. And I will here discuss with you this whole idea of the China model of development and the China model of democracy, all from a civilizational state perspective. And China's dramatic rise has indeed catch the attention worldwide. China now is the world's largest economy by purchasing power parity. It's already, by PPP, purchasing power parity, 20% larger than the US economy. It's also the world's largest trading nation and with the world's largest, most comprehensive manufacturing industries. And what's more important, as a socialist country, China has eradicated extreme poverty across this vast country and has achieved compulsory education for all, housing for all, medical insurance and pension for all. With a life expectancy, I just checked this morning, higher than United States. By the end of the year 2020, China life expectancy 77.9, United States is 77. Of course, China has its share of problems, some of which are very serious and require dedicated solutions. But China's overall success is beyond doubt. And some claim that it's due to the abundance of cheap labor. Yet, in fact, most developing countries today offer cheaper labor than China. Some claim it's due to the authoritarian political system. But by Western standards, there are many authoritarian states in Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Arab world, etc. Yet, most of them have not yet performed that well as China does. So, if these explanations cannot explain China's success, we should think beyond the box. To my mind, it has to do with the fundamental nature of China as a state, as a civilizational state, and the Chinese model of development and Chinese system of democracy. And the China model is guided by a philosophy called seeking truth from facts. It's an ancient Chinese concept dating from the Han Dynasty, which means around 200 BC. Basically, they believe that facts rather than ideological dogmas, whether from the East or from the West, should serve as the ultimate criteria for establishing truth. And another feature of the China model of development is called the people's livelihood first. It's also a well-tested concept from ancient China, from ancient China's political governance philosophy. In today's context, people's livelihood first means whatever the party or the state does, political, economic, or social policies, they must all boil down to deliver tangible benefits, material and non-material, to the people. And the China model values what you can deliver to the people, the kind of can-do spirit, rather than indulgence in empty talks. In the United States, you have Obama, President Obama. He came to power with the slogan, change. Yet 8 years passed of his 2 terms, but without much change. This is inconceivable in China. Now let's come to the Chinese model of democracy. It is widely assumed in the Western political narrative that state legitimacy comes from universal suffrage and multi-party competitive elections. Yet this assumption may raise two issues. First, historically, it's not true, as universal suffrage is a recent development, a recent phenomenon. One can claim, for instance, US state has no legitimacy prior to 1965, as African blacks, African Americans had not been allowed to vote prior to 1965. Furthermore, this practice, universal suffrage, is confined only to nation states. It will be very difficult to imagine that, say, the European Union could establish its legitimacy this way and still play its steering role or unifying role. Anyway, EU is going way down now with the Ukraine crisis. And these two issues help us better understand why the Chinese sense of legitimacy is vastly different from the Western one. For China is not a typical nation state, but rather a civilizational state. And its sense of legitimacy is deeply rooted in its own historical traditions and shaped over the 2 millennia, at least, since the country was first unified under the Emperor Qing in 221 BC. For instance, China's one-party governance today, the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, meet with a lot of criticism in the West. Yet, to most Chinese, it's nothing extraordinary. For most of the past 2,000 years, China has been governed by a kind of unified ruling entity, a kind of one-party system, if you wish. Otherwise, the country disintegrates. And China indeed copied the American political model following its Republican Revolution in 1911. And then the country degenerated into civil wars, into warlords fighting each other. And behind these warlords were European powers, etc. But China's unified ruling entity has been buttressed by a system of meritocracy with officials selected through public exams. China invented this system. It's called the Keji system in the Sui dynasty, which was close to 1,500 years ago, and which this kind of system, claimed to represent or genuinely represent the most, if not all, people under heaven in the Chinese universe. And furthermore, during much of this unified ruling entity or one-party rule, China was arguably a much better governed country, more peaceful, more prosperous than the European states of the same epoch. 11 years ago, when Arab Spring occurred, I had a debate with Professor Fukuyama, the author of The End of History and The Last Man, in Shanghai. And you can find the text of debate on the website, on the internet. Fukuyama predicted China may also experience its own version of Arab Spring. I said, no chance. On the other hand, the Arab Spring will soon become Arab Winter. In the end, it became, from my point of view and the views of many others, became Arab Winter. He argued that China should embrace political reform to adopt a Western political model. I said that both China and the United States need political reforms. But to my mind, with my knowledge of US political system, US history, the United States needs political reform more urgently than China. And the American political system is a product of pre-industrial era. Again, I made a prediction. I said, otherwise, without substantial political reform, the United States may produce a leader worse off than George W. Bush. I made this prediction 11 years ago. It turned out to be true, at least in the eyes of many people. I also predicted a few years ago about the British democracy. I said, you must carry out substantial political reform. Otherwise, Great Britain may become Little Britain. Indeed, to most Chinese today, having witnessed its 2008 financial crisis of the United States, its United States COVID debacle, its massive gun violence, its failure of Afghanistan, etc. Indeed, American democracy to most Chinese is increasingly like American joke. And still the Americans love to lecture Chinese, lecture us, of course, and we are more than happy to lecture them back. United States is obviously on the wrong side of history. Its decline may accelerate unless it embraces serious political reform to free itself as much as possible from this control and influence and even the yoke of the military-industrial complex and from the Wall Streets. I will stop here and I thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much.